He doesn't say the name first, and that is the tell. He starts with the future and only then allows the past to step into the light, because the past is noisy and the future needs quiet to grow. Prince William sits opposite Eugene Levi with Windsor behind him like an old ally and answers a question that sounds simple and isn't. What kind of world will your son inherit when it's his turn to wear the weight? He talks about purpose before pageantry, about work that actually touches lives, about change that isn't a wrecking ball but a recalibration, and then the sentence lands like a bell struck in a chapel at dusk. We can't go back to the practices Harry and I grew up in. There it is, the first clean contour of his brother in months, drawn not as a jab but as a boundary, a ruler laid across a table where the blueprints for a different monarchy are spread flat. The headlines will fixate on two brothers who haven't shared a room in too long, on a memoir that turned private pain into public scripture, on a Netflix confession that made living rooms choose sides. But listen to the timbre of William's voice and you hear something more interesting than feud. You hear a father who has studied the architecture of his own childhood and decided to edit the floor plan. George will not grow up the same. Not in a house that teaches him the difference between duty and exposure, between transparency and theatre, between family and fodder. That is the promise, and promises from future kings have a way of hardening into policy. He doesn't rehearse the catalogue of wounds, he doesn't need to. Everyone remembers the lines from Spare that could slice skin, the shove, the dog bowl, the necklace breaking like a sentence halfway through, and the claims about briefings and lies to protect that made comms teams across 2 continents reach for aspirin. Everyone remembers the California camera glow, the interviews that felt like bonfires, the insistence from Harry that he hadn't aired dirty laundry so much as hung out truth to dry in the sun. William's counter is not a counter at all, it's a refusal to play the old game. He touches the bruise once and moves on, returning to the only arena he can control, the household he runs and the institution he will inherit. Change is on my agenda, he says, and you believe him because change is already in the room. Less balcony ballet, more measurable outcomes, fewer leaks, more locked doors when children need quiet, fewer myths about stiff upper lips, more sentences that begin with I felt and end with here's what we did. He is careful with heat. Not overly radical change, he adds, which is exactly the sort of phrase that lets tradition unclench. He is also careful with hope. Pride in his wife's remission and his father's resilience sits beside the honest admission that last year took him to not great places, because it's possible to be the nation's next anchor and still feel the undertow at 3 a.m. when a child asks a question with no easy answer. That is where the pledge about George, Charlotte, and Louis lives, not in PR decks but in late-night kitchen light, where parents decide what their children will and won't be asked to carry. In the old days, the practices William names without naming had a way of turning boys into headlines before they became men, briefing wars fought by adults who never had to live with the fallout in a classroom, photographers waiting at gates like weather the forecast never warned about, the ritual of silence that wasn't strength so much as backlog, turning small hurts into hard stories that came out sideways years later. He wants none of it. He wants a model that lets a royal child learn consequence without becoming content, that teaches trust without requiring secrecy to be a religion, that treats the press like a tool you pick up when the job needs doing, not a room you're locked inside every hour of every day. He knows the criticism by heart, that distance becomes arrogance, that control becomes stage management. That tightening the circle is just rebranding the old discretion. His answer is a test he's already taking in public: show receipts. When the Wales agenda touches early years, he wants experts at the table before the camera arrives. When mental health is the brief, he wants services funded and scaled, not only hashtags minted and retired. When homelessness is on the docket, he wants pilots that survive past the photo call. That is how you persuade a skeptical country that the new privacy isn't a fortress, it's a workshop. And still the brothers' silhouette stands at the edge of the frame, because story and blood care nothing for careful strategies. William does not deny what everyone can see, that the distance is real, that the last reunion skipped the chapter the public wanted, that a quick meeting with the king did not become a longer one with the heir. He does not turn absence into ammunition. He does something more subversive for a soap opera economy: he refuses to feed it. You can almost hear the subtext: he will not speak into a microphone if reconciliation comes, it will not be for ratings, it will be for children who deserve to remember uncle and cousins as people, not as plot points. Until then, the work continues, because the crown does not pause for family therapy. The phrase "George won't grow up the same" is not code for bitterness, it is code for intent. It means school runs that aren't ambushes and holidays that aren't hunts. It means telling truths at home before they become mysteries online. It means a boy who understands his future not as a spotlight you stand under until you burn, but as a lamp you carry so other people can see where they're going. In this model, history is not an anchor but a compass. You study where it dragged you under and you redraw the map. There is a reason William keeps returning to change for good. He is allergic to revolution as theatre. He is addicted to iteration as craft. That is why the comments about not fearing change matter. The fear is what makes institutions brittle, the craft is what lets them bend and not break. If you want to know what that will look like, stop looking only at balconies and start looking at timetables. Fewer set-piece spectacles, more local repetitions that build trust like muscle. Fewer midnight briefings about who said what to whom, more quiet agreements about who gets what done by Friday. The monarchy, like any legacy system, runs on habits. Change one habit, change the machine. And then there is the softer pledge wrapped inside the harder one, that George will grow up knowing that family is not content, even when the world wants it to be. That he will watch his father choose the kitchen table over a camera on the days when life tests the roof. That he will learn to carry lineage without confusing it for license, to hear criticism without handing the keys of his peace to the loudest stranger in the room. That when he disagrees with someone he loves, he can reach for a private room and a pot of tea before he reaches for a platform. None of this requires anyone else to recant or return. It requires one household to decide its values and then live them repetitively until repetition becomes culture. That is what William is telegraphing when he talks about the world and the job he wants George to inherit, not a fantasy where pain never happens, but a framework that turns pain into purpose without needing an audience for the alchemy. The irony, of course, is that saying this out loud is news precisely because he has spent months not saying anything at all. The silence was strategic, the sentence is surgical. It acknowledges the brother, honors the lesson, and reroutes the energy toward the only outcome that matters for a father planning a future, a son who can do the work without being eaten by the story that surrounds it. If reconciliation comes, it will be stronger for being built on those terms. If it doesn't, the door stayed open without the children standing in the draft. And somewhere beyond the noise, a 12-year-old boy with a long shadow ahead of him will go to sleep knowing that he is not a character in a franchise but a child in a family that has decided to protect his becoming. That is the difference. That is the line in the sand. That is what the phrase "George won't grow up the same" really means when a father who has seen how the old script ends sits down with a kind interviewer, takes a breath, and writes a new first page.